So Shadow of the Erdtree just dropped. Before we get in, I'd just like to get some things out of the way. If you would like to jump straight in, please skip to this timestamp. My history with the series. I was originally introduced to these games with Bloodborne. Loved it, died way too many times, but the atmosphere and that feeling of winning against a boss you spent hours to, that constantly got the better of you, was an absolute thrill. Some time passes and I play Elden Ring day one at launch. No guide or idea what I was in for, and left myself to get lost in the lands between. My playtime for the game was very high as a result of this, but I remember vividly telling my friends at the time that this will be a game that we'll be talking about for years in the future. Well deserved for Game of the Year. Just the scope and scale alone, you could really get lost in this game. I remember back when the community was figuring out everything with all the secrets and small details. After that, I decided to go back and play the whole series of these styles of games. Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3 with the DLC. Demon Souls, Sekiro's and Old Hunters. So before getting into Shadow of the Erdtree, I had already had an idea of what I'd be getting myself into. DLC, or expansions, for single player games are usually historically the hardest content the devs make, since they know who their audience is, people who beat the base game. As a result, the DLC for FromSoft games have historically been known for being difficult, which is why expansions are somewhat rare to see for single player games, since companies would rather sell a whole new game or drop a glorified title update as a new installment to increase their audience and potential sales. Rant aside, so that is why opinions for Shadow of the Erdtree should be considered in this metric as content for players who have tackled millennia, maybe done a few new game plus cycles and really conquered the base game. Personally, the past DLC for me and most of the community for these games are the best content the series has to offer. Some are short, but the quality more than makes up for that. Which brings us to Shadow of the Erdtree. For my playthrough, I had started the DLC on Journey 3 or New Game Plus 2. The new game cycles typically increase enemy damage output, but also the amount of runes they drop, and each cycle will increase both the risk and reward by a set amount. The footage you will see of my playthrough will only be of the first area, as well as the Mesmer boss fight, who was heavily shown in promotions leading up to the DLC's release. I will not be mentioning any specific battles, but to disclose how much of the game I've played around 40 hours of the expansion and beat the final boss, along with exploring all map areas. So feel free to judge my gameplay. This DLC doesn't mess around, you're thrown straight in, no cutscene, and you just go. It feels mad how much of the surrounding area you can see, but can't get to yet. It really embodies adventure in its purest form. The scale of Shadow of the Erdtree is huge, and could pretty much be its own release. If you was worried at all about getting your money's worth, the amount of content you get in is way more than previous expansions in both boss fights and areas. If you came into this video expecting a buying guide, I would recommend it, especially if you liked base game Elden Ring. Just maybe level up and tackle all of that game's major bosses before jumping in here. One wise thing the DLC does, which isn't hugely elaborated on, is the new Erdtree fragments. I feel like the biggest discourse surrounding the content at the minute is the difficulty. Level up wise for me and a friend of mine, we was practically at the ceiling. Bosses rarely dropped enough runes for a level up, and the stats you invest in eventually hit diminishing returns. So this is where the Erdtree fragments come into play. Collect 3 of these across the Shadow Realm and you will take less and deal more damage, so basically your means of leveling up. I know the community likes to bring in raw skill of these games, and I know technically you could beat any boss at level 1 with the DK bongos, but for a more casual player, this is a huge benefit, and if you're at all struggling with this game's content, just know that this is the designer's way of helping you tackle that content. At the very beginning before you enter the Shadow Realm, you're told of other adventurers in the game's story that you can summon and interact with. This really gave the adventure a more grander scale, and the neat touch is they can be summoned for certain boss fights. Speaking of, spirit ashes are quite the divisive topic within the community. Personally, I experiment from time to time with them, however this time around, the feature has been nerfed to the ground. Bosses rarely, if ever, flinch. Their attacks are way more AoE centered, so no longer do summons feel overpowered, and if anything, they are a joke with their damage output. You can buff them using a new DLC exclusive item, but I rarely felt a significant improvement and never went out of my way to find them. Let's talk bosses, the high point for many. I found 2 of them in particular I really enjoyed, one being Mesmer and the other I'll save mentioning to avoid spoilers. I'll elaborate more on the negatives, but some kind of felt like they was trying to one-up Millennia with the meme status of being toughest boss in the base game, which I wasn't a huge fan of personally. Shadow of the Erdtree really doubles down on aspects from the base game Elden Ring, such as bosses having lingering attacks, or not wanting you to use summons before a fight. Also, bosses you fight sometimes show up later in the overworld of the game, which some people love and some people hate. Personally, it kind of softens the blow of the original fight, so I kind of don't like it myself. Caves and catacombs are back from the base game, however this time around they have much more unique level structures to them, unlike the base game where a lot of that was recycled. One aspect of the DLC that surprised me is that there are way more weapons and talismans included than I expected, and a lot of them have really cool and unique buffs and abilities. Just wanted to get it out of the way. Wasn't a huge fan of how the map is laid out. Map design wise, these games have always been cryptic, so if you don't mind that and know what you're in for, then that's fine. But using logic to scale the map felt pointless, not to mention I was offline for a good amount of the experience, so there were no message hints on the ground for me. You start somewhere in the middle of the map. It is extremely vertical, making it really hard to know if you are above or below an area. The base game remedied this by giving elevations their own maps, as well as having a simple start from the bottom and make your way up structure. This time around, all elevations on the map are grouped together, which can make navigating really confusing. There are also areas of the map that look accessible, however approaching them can lead to dying. Also, discussing with my friends, we noticed a strange lack of sites of grace on the map. And strangely enough, some landmarks on the map do not have sites of grace to accompany them, so getting to those areas and backtracking can be rather tedious as a result, which is strange since I never felt like the base game had that issue. Going back to Dark Souls 1 for a moment, in the area Anor Londo, the map can be quite confusing to navigate, however most players get this light bulb moment when they realise they can fit through this gap of the map. Personally, I would have preferred if Shadow of the Erdtree tackled a similar approach when navigating the map. In Shadow of the Erdtree, I personally found the map a bit too confusing to navigate. Some areas felt like they were connected, however because of the elevation, they weren't really connected, it just looked like that on the map. Maybe as a side effect of being an open world game, you get lost way easier than in more linear titles. I've been trying to stay off social media, but one aspect of these games that annoys me is how the public seems to only know them as being difficult. I feel like it is a side effect of making these kinds of games, but the constant meme status and similar to Armored Core 6, people immediately saying that the game is too hard, it's so frustrating to see. Did we not learn anything from the instant churned out opinion of that game? I do think to some degree the devs are kind of at fault for this as well as the fans. Each game gets harder and harder. Look at the final boss of Demon Souls, King Elliot. This guy is a joke, and this was considered brutal back then. Similar to zombies in the 2010s, it feels like each installment they point the dial further and further to the right to see how people will react. I think this time around some people are feeling that fatigue. I still think review bombing the game on Steam is going way too far though. As for my overall thoughts on the bosses, I do think in some cases we are seeing examples of that. However, overall I wouldn't say every boss fight has that problem. Similar to past games, I still take hours at a time attempting each boss, but I know for many people, as well as these kinds of games not really respecting your time, that is asking way too much of them. Some of it may be the open world structure and how it has to make nearly all the bosses you fight be tackled in any order. But unlike a game like Sekiro with how it doesn't have leveling up, here it doesn't feel like the fights are tailor made for where the player will be in the Shadow Realm. I'd like to see them attempt the Sekiro structure again. That game never got an expansion, and in defense of Shadow of the Erdtree, this must have been a nightmare to balance. The boss structure, how players approach the DLC at different points, and the weapons, it is impressive when you think about it how balanced this game actually is. One last point on the bosses that the community is mixed on is that the lingering hitboxes are back, and it feels like they really doubled down on them. They will absolutely punish panic rolling this time around. Some miscellaneous issues I have with the game. First off, the game engine. This game uses an altered engine that started with Demon Souls, and I really feel like it's showing its age. Some issues I'm personally tired of, the biggest one being the lock on camera. Some boss attempts especially having the camera clip into their model or focusing way too much on the boss to where you can't see yourself is really frustrating. Another issue I wasn't sure whether or not to mention is the control config. Having to claw grip to have the optimal controller configuration kinda gives me bad hand cramps, and I know loads of games have this issue, it's just that in Elden Ring, sessions are way more intense, so I feel it a lot worse. More customizable control layouts would help with this. Another complaint I personally have is the lack of torrent combat, or Torrent not being able to have a role-like move in battle. His dash move can get him away from attacks, but most people will take the roll iframes over it, and I just wanted to use Torrent more in combat personally. One final complaint, and this could be made irrelevant in the future, is I wish the expansion elaborated into some of the lore in the base game. I feel like aspects that fans were elaborated on from back in the day weren't addressed, in particular with Melina and Torrent. But once again, this could be in the night on description that I missed, or maybe a YouTube video will make some kind of discovery in the future. Overall, I feel like this DLC is incredible. For the price tag alone, you get so much content, just a few issues here and there. I would love to make a review at some point, and maybe based on how this video is received, I will attempt that. I just personally feel like it is too early to say how I feel on Shadow of the Erdtree, but there still is way more I would like to discuss. It would also be interesting to see if aspects of this video ages poorly. I do think a lot of the community right now is jumping the gun on their thoughts on social media and YouTube. Even having finished this game and making this video, I still don't feel like I've truly put how I feel about this game into words. But I understand that there's always a push on social media to get your opinions out there as quickly as possible. Thanks for watching to the end of this video. I'm curious what other people think about Shadow of the Erdtree, so please feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comment section below.